folks, the Fujifilm X Summit was just held, and no surprise, we did see the announcement of a new GFX100 Mark II, which is the successor to their flagship. There's a lot of interesting things coming out of this one. It's smaller, lighter, cheaper, and in many ways better than its predecessor, the GFX100. But that one still remains at $10,000 in the market. The price hasn't dropped. In this video, I want to talk you through where I think this sits in the lineup and run through what some of what I consider to be the most important and most interesting features of this, upgrades over the rest of the range, and talk about why you might still consider a GFX 100S or the original GFX 100. This should be viewed alongside my recent GFX buying guide that ran through all of the different cameras and their pros and cons. I'll put a card to that one above. Now, from the outset, I have to say I think the GFX 100 II looks fantastic. I think the styling of it looks really great. I love the textured covering it has on it, the dark gunmetal gray color, the sloping top deck that lets you more easily see your controls and your top sub display. Really, really nice. And there's a bunch of improvements on this that I think make it a worthy Mark II, but it is still going to make the decision quite difficult for people if you're considering upgrading or going to the GFX 100 range for the first time. Now, let's jump in with some of the major upgrades. One top line thing, this will now do 8 frames per second continuous shooting. Now, that's not like what you can do on a mirrorless full frame, like 20 and 30 frames. And yes, they're often up around 50 megapixel. So, it's not challenging them, but still 8 frames a second for this kind of segment, the medium format segment, is really, really fast, especially when you're dealing with 102 megapixel files. Now, to allow that, it is now finally using a CF Express Type B card alongside a UHS 2 SD card slot rather than dual SD. It simply wouldn't be able to keep up. You couldn't build a buffer big enough to be doing that kind of speed and resolution if you didn't have a fast media to clear it. And I think that's probably true of the upgraded video specs we're going to talk through later. This is also, and I think this is fairly significant because they are going after the video market squarely with this camera, finally, the first GFX camera that has a full-size HDMI port rather than the stupid micro one that all the others have been using. Really glad to see that, and if I were looking at getting one of the 100 range, that could be the determining factor for me. In terms of the sensor, I have a feeling it's the same base sensor, the same, array, the same exact resolution. It's the parts surrounding it that have been updated. So it's a higher speed sensor, and it's able to take a higher charge before it starts clipping, which means that the base ISO can now go down to 80. So it was already a phenomenal sensor. It's now being able to do 8K video with a big crop. We'll get to that a bit later. But it's not, I don't think you could say, a wholly new sensor. It's a redesign of the previous. The camera now has the smaller form factor like the GFX 100S with a single of the newer battery type in there with an optional battery grip. So somewhere in between the two, the previous GFX 100 had the built-in grip with dual of the older batteries, and the 100S you don't have the option for a grip. So this one you have one battery in the body and you can put 2 more in the grip. It does, like is often the case, using the grip it actually ends up being taller than its predecessor. But you are getting 3 batteries in there, but I do think that they missed a trick. If they had put a rear second sub-display on there so that the look and feel more matched the GFX 100, I think that would be really nice. A great touch if they had added that on the grip. We're going to get to that. Also, the button layout is fairly different. The GFX range is starting to get more and more fragmented as they're moving and changing the button layout. It now has an immense 9.44 million dot EVF, which you're able to still use the tilting adapter with. It's got a one-time magnification, which you can reduce down to the 0.77 like the previous one, but that's going to be huge and immersive. You're also looking at up to 8 stops of image stabilization. That's when you're pairing the camera with the correct, I think it's 3 different lenses that support that. Otherwise, the sensor itself is good for 5.5 stops. One thing you've got to recognize great about the Fuji range, they're innovating in the X series and it's kind of trickling up rather than trickling down some of that technology. So we're seeing the Series 5 processor in this for the first time in the GFX range and the deep learning AI-based autofocus that we saw from the XH range. So new detection modes for people and animals and trains and all of that kind of thing coming into this range, which should be a really welcome improvement. As good as the autofocus has been, and arguably Fuji's ahead of the pack for medium format, it still does misrecognize faces often, and you think you've got a face when actually it's focused on something in the background. They've added a new film stock, Reala Ace, which doesn't seem like it's going to come to the other cameras immediately, but it's new for this guy. It also has pixel shift, which will take you up to a 400 megapixel image, but still not in camera. You have to take the images and then use software on your computer to get to that. And in terms of the layout, it is more like the 100S. You don't have all of the controls on top. You've got more of a PASM dial and then your custom modes. That just is what it is. We've got some new function buttons across the top, but we still don't have a D-pad on the back. And if you're comparing it to like the earlier, like the 50S even, there are a lot of custom function buttons that have been removed from the back of the camera, which for me were the most convenient ones to get to. Hopefully those ones up behind the shutter release are going to be nice and handy once I get one in hand. And please do let me know what you'd like to see tested on this guy. I have one requested from Fujifilm Hong Kong and from B&H Photo. As soon as I get it, I'll be giving you my full hands-on thoughts. And I'll be updating my Fujifilm Expert Setup Guide. That course takes you through the entire GFX range, shows you the camera control, what every single control does and can be customized to do on each of the different cameras, how I suggest you initially set them up, as well as a complete menu deep dive showing you everything that these cameras are capable of. And very soon, the new GFX100 Mark II will be added to that. Now, in terms of video, it's funny, a lot of people, when you talk about either medium format cameras or retro style cameras, say that they don't want video. I don't know if we're going to see that pushback here, but the biggest move that Fujifilm are making with this one is squarely aimed at videographers. So we have a bunch of different formats now, including anamorphic and ultra wide angle, 1080 up to 120 frames per second, 4K with no crop, 8K with fairly significant, I think it's like 1.44 crop that's giving you a 1-to-1 pixel readout, as well as 5.8K. Now, from the samples that I've seen, it seems like the 5.8 and 8K suffer pretty badly from rolling shutter, but down at 4K, when you're working with faster readout speeds, it performs quite well. They also now have waveform and vector scope, which for videographers is great, and integrated, no plugins required, Frame.io uplink, so that you can be sending your stills or video off to the cloud to be kind of edited in real time or backed up at least. There are, however, a couple of negatives in my opinion, and it basically comes down to that issue of layout. Removing the function buttons which started on the 100S on the rear, and the removal of the D-pad, and kind of simplifying things, going to a PSAM dial rather than having dedicated shutter speed and ISO dials, and then you've got your aperture on the lens. It just means, I really value when you have a system of cameras where the layout between the kind of prosumer and professional have a consistent look and feel, where the buttons, haven't moved too much. Even on my Nikon cameras, when you find that just, the play button has been moved from there to there, when you're shooting between two different cameras, it can really be a pain. And I don't know, this is a super featured, high spec, $7,500 camera aimed at professionals, but they're going for a more prosumer kind of layout of the buttons in the same way they did with the 100S. So I'm just not too sure about that. Let me know what you guys think about it. But having said that, it does improve on the other cameras in almost every way, but does it give you enough, if you're not doing video, to consider it over the 100S? I really don't know. One thing I have to say, the 100 being $10,000 on the used market is actually less expensive than the 100S, even though it's now selling for like $5,200 brand new. So it's much closer in terms of its resale price than the flagship, the 100 is. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few months, are they finally going to reduce the price? That GFX 100 hasn't moved from $9,995 since it was released, and this new camera really does overtake it in many ways. For $7,500 you get the body, for another $500 or $800 you can get the grip and a couple of extra batteries. And other than omitting that second subdial and the redesign of the layout, it kind of leaves the other one for dead. And I have to say, in terms of ergonomics, this new one looks, on paper at least, or in the renders, so much nicer to use than the GFX 100. Now, before you leave me the angry comments, of course, this is all based on having seen other people's coverage, having studied up on it, having spoken to people who've had hands-on time with it, and being super familiar with the GFX range up to this camera. But I haven't got it in hand yet. As soon as I do, I'll be bringing you my full thoughts. So let me know what you'd like to see. Check out the Fuji setup guide below. Leave me any questions, and I'll see you soon.